Okay, welcome everyone. And yes, just a reminder that please keep yourselves on mute and then please put your questions into the chat and I'll work my way through those at the end of the webinar. So just to formally introduce myself, as you can see on screen, my name is Ingemar Hunnings. I'm director of HCL. We're a management consultancy helping businesses in the legal services sector with all sorts of stuff around running their businesses. A lot of work around compliance, data protection, but working with case management systems. I also do a lot of work with people wanting to qualify through the SQE. So this webinar is about the SQE, QWE, and exemptions. Okay. And I hope it's going to enlighten everyone, take away some of the mystery, misconceptions, and such like. A lot of acronyms. Okay. So HCL, where I'm a director of, is Hunnings Consultancy Limited. SQE, the Solicitor's Qualification Exam. QWE, Qualifying Work Experience. Okay, so in September 2021, the SRA changed, the SRA being the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which is the regulator of solicitors in England and Wales. Now, the UK has 4 jurisdictions, England and Wales being the largest. Solicitors are the largest group of lawyers in there who conduct most of the legal work, plus also some advocacy, but they don't have the higher rights unless they take extra exams. We have barristers, who's a smaller group of specialist advocates. So just a little bit of background there. So this is for the solicitors. The Solicitors Regulation Authority, the SRA, in September 2021, brought in a new way to qualify, which is replacing the old way, the LPC, Legal Practice Course. And we're in a transition period, getting towards the end of that transition period for people still being able to use the LPC route to qualify. I'm going to start sharing my screen now just to show something to assist us with this part of me talking through the situation. So we have this here on screen. The SQE exam is made up of 4 elements, which everyone sits. Unless they get exemptions, they have to pass all of these parts to qualify as a solicitor. So you have to have a degree or a degree equivalent. So it's a lot more flexible. You can have something which is equivalent. You can have that checked through, I think it's ENIC is one of the organizations they recognize to see the equivalency of the qualification you got. So A, you need to have a degree or degree equivalent. Does not have to be a law degree. Okay? No need for it to be a law degree, nor is there a requirement for you to do a GDL or transition course, although that may help you with passing the exams. The second element is passing the exam, the SQE1 exam and the SQE2 exam. I'll talk about those in more detail in a moment. You also need to have 2 years full-time equivalent qualifying work experience, which has to be confirmed to the SRA by an SRA regulated solicitor, or a COLP, which is the compliance officer legal practice in an SRA regulated law firm. So that's very technical, more applicable to people working in England or Wales in a law firm. Okay. And then finally, the usual bit of proving your ID to the SRA when you're applying to be admitted, DBS, criminal records checks, and those sorts of things, which everyone has to do. All right. So let's start looking at these things in more detail. B and C, I can't really help you very much with D. But B and C, I do help with these things. Now, I'm going to share this page on our website. So what is the SQE exam? So you can search things up on our website. I put the information here, A, so that I've got this to refer back to, but B, it's there for everyone else to see as well. And we will blog to update on things, not just, of course, about the QWE, SQE and things like that, but all sorts of other areas which may be specific to people practicing in England and Wales, or indeed data protection, which is much more general than that and such like. So what is the SQE exam? Okay, there are 2 SQE exams, the SQE1 and the SQE2. Now, we do not provide assistance with training, but if you were to search up SQE training on our website, there's a page I've put up there where I've listed the main training providers that I'm aware of with links to their websites, an idea of their charging, etc. you need to work that with them. You can self-study, but, obviously that's up to you. Exams, the SQE1 and the SQE2. The SQE1 is a multiple choice test. Everyone sits it, and it's made up of two elements, the FLK1, the FLK2, functioning legal knowledge, okay? And as it says, 180 multiple choice questions, 10 hours of exam time. It's tough. Partly it's tough because of the timing on that. It's quick fire. There's usually, I think, 4 potential answers, which more than one of which could be right. Okay. It's testing you in these areas of law that you can see on there. Where can you sit the exams? I'll cover that in just a moment. Okay, with some guidance on there. So the SQE1 is testing your knowledge of the law. Roughly about 55% of the people who sit the exam pass it. So it is tough. Now, the second exam is the SQE2, and the SQE2 exam is not testing you so much. Well, it's testing you on the knowledge, but it's also testing you on your ability to operate as a solicitor. Okay, it's testing your skills as well. So the SRA is looking at you as if you were newly qualified. Would they feel comfortable to refer a client to you? How would you deal with those scenarios? So there are 16 tests, 12 are written and 4 are oral. And the oral ones, you currently still have to travel to the UK. For them, you can sit those in Cardiff, Manchester, or London, as far as I understand. And the oral ones, for example, there's one where you're put into a court effectively with a judge who disagrees, harangues you, a client who doesn't cooperate, things like that. They want to see how will you cope with that situation. Now, where can you sit these exams? Okay, we've got a page on the website. You can click on the link. It takes you through to the SRA. And just to point out that on here, the SRA has a tool to find out. So the SQE1 and the written parts of the SQE2, as far as I understand, will be sat in the Pearson VUE test centres. Okay, in England and Wales, Scotland as well, I believe, that's where you would sit your driving theory test. Okay, but they have locations all over the world, so you can search for them. And I did a search on Dubai, and you can see, it brings this up here where you can go. So you can put in, and it will show you the closest to where you are. Okay, so you could be in Kenya, and then you're looking up. Let's do this in Kenya and search. Let's see what it does. And it's showing you where the closest centers are currently at that stage. So there's a little tool there that's of help. You've got the URL on the screen, but you can get that through the SRA screen as well. So, all right, of the people who sit the SQE2 is a higher percentage that seem to pass, about 77%, something like that. But remember, only those people who have passed the SQE1 or got an exemption from the SQE1 can apply to sit the SQE2 exam. And if you use your MySRA profile on the SRA website to make the applications, and I think there's a company called Kaplan currently, which is administering those. So we've been looking at the exams, and that's dealt with by them. They're tough. Good luck. Obviously, we need to maintain the standard. I, as a solicitor, I'm concerned that people joining the profession should be able to meet the standard, but also I don't want the method for qualifying to be discriminatory or locking people out who can't, are wealthy enough, X, Y, or Z. So the SQE exam has tried to address some of those things. Now, I'm not an apologist for the SRA, but I think it does in some sorts of ways, one of which is the next element that we're talking about, which I'm now going to explain, is the qualifying work experience, the QWE. So under the old LPC route, you had to get a training contract with a law firm. The law firm was responsible, had to register with the SRA, and was responsible for taking you through the training contract and effectively deciding whether you qualified. The SQE is quite different. It takes that power and control away from the law firms and gives it to you, the aspiring solicitor. The SRA takes back the responsibility for stating whether you should be licensed to practice. That is done through the exams, the SQE1 and the SQE2. Instead of a training contract, it's completely different. You now have to acquire certain skills which are tested in the SQE2 exam to be able to practice well as a solicitor. Okay. Now, so you have to have a minimum of 2 years full-time equivalent qualifying work experience, which is then confirmed to the SRA. The SRA will only allow those people who it regulates to do that confirmation effectively on their behalf. So a barrister, a US qualified attorney can't do it. Even a Scottish solicitor can't do it. It has to be someone regulated by the SRA, so they retain that power and control over us. We need to act with honesty and integrity whilst doing that. Now, you can, as well as doing that through a firm where you may have a solicitor, if you don't have a solicitor, you can reach out to an external solicitor to have your QWE confirmed. And that's a service that we provide. Brought it up on screen here. Okay. And I've done this at the time of this webinar, which is September 2025, I've confirmed the QWE of over 160 people. Most of those outside the UK, a different bunch, a mixture of people, but most of that is working in-house. But we've done confirmations for all sorts of situations where people have been working for government agencies, even in the White House, the UN, in charities, and sometimes in a law firm overseas, perhaps. So I'm going to bring up on screen this. Okay, so this is our modified version of the form that the SRA has suggested. So for QWE, you can obtain your qualifying work experience in up to 4, but no more than 4 placements. That's what they call it. And the solicitor confirming your qualifying work experience will be confirming the period of time, the placement, okay, to the SRA. It's very straightforward. If that person is working in your organization because they would have seen your work, it's very straightforward. If, however, you need to get an external solicitor to do the confirmation, then they will have to do more. They will have to review your work and confirm to the SRA that they have reviewed your work. And they will have to get feedback from your supervisor, again, confirming they've done so to the SRA. Qualifying work experience is defined. Well, first of all, I have found recently that the SRA has given some guidance as to what they regard as full-time. And it's not clear on their website at all, but if you go into your profile and you're starting to put in the information to ask the solicitor to do the confirmation, the SRA has said that they regard 32 hours a week as being the minimum number of hours for it to be full-time. Okay, so there's some guidance I found out last week when I was helping someone. Okay, and also what the solicitor is doing is confirming to the SRA that you have the opportunity to acquire and can exhibit, or they've seen you exhibiting, the relevant competencies that the SRA has set out in their form. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that in any further detail. But just to say, if you have a solicitor in your organization, whether they regard that you have had the opportunity to acquire those competencies is their decision. It's not mine, because they're the one who's doing the confirmation, and they would be responsible for their decisions to the SRA. I can only talk about my views when I'm doing the confirmation, but there's some general guidance on that. Qualifying work experience is defined as the provision of legal services by reference to the Legal Services Act. The interpretation of that is up to the confirming solicitor. I've asked the SRA for guidance. They have pointedly refused to give guidance. They say it's up to the judgment of the confirming solicitor. And I think part of the reason why the SRA is saying that is because they do not want to start limiting the ways that legal services could be provided. But they're very open to that being in-house or in charities. So it does not have to be done in a law firm. It does not have to be done in English and Welsh law. It does not have to be done in England and Wales. It can be voluntary. And you can reach back in time as far as you want for your QWE, so long as either that solicitor recalls and can do the confirmation, or if it's an external solicitor, so long as you can show them the work, which may be the challenge. Okay, so that is talking about qualifying work experience. What I want to move on to now is exemptions. When can you get exemptions? You can't get an exemption from the degree or degree equivalent. That's just a requirement. Exams. So the SQE1 exam, I know the SRA doesn't like this wording, but this is the clearest wording. You can get an exemption from the SQE1 if you have sat and passed the LPC, the old route to qualifying, the LPC exam. So you can effectively upload to your MySRA profile proof that you passed the exam, and they will then give you an exemption or a green tick next to the SQE1. Okay, so you won't need to sit that, but you will need to sit the SQE2. Can you get an exemption from both the SQE1 and the SQE2? In reality, no. The SRA seems to be unwilling to grant an exemption from both exams. I get that. That makes sense. They need to see you and your competence in one way or another. It is possible to fill in a form, the general application form, which I'll show later, for asking for an exemption from the SQE1, and you put together a huge dossier of paperwork to apply for that. The SRA have told me that they've only ever granted that once since September 2021. So I would say the chances of you getting an exemption from the SQE1 that way are vanishingly small, and you'd probably better to sit the exam. Okay, so that's the SQE1 exam. Okay, SQE2, can you get an exemption from that? Well, people who are qualified already as lawyers in some jurisdiction, not just foreign qualified, but also people qualified as lawyers in the UK, but not as solicitors. So a barrister, a Scottish lawyer, for example, and such like, a patent attorney, they can apply for an exemption from the SQE2 exam. If you're not qualified, you can't. So they can apply for an exemption. Some people are lucky enough to have an agreed exemption. Now, what that means is the SRA has looked at your qualification and they said, okay, there's enough equivalence for us to say anyone who's qualified in that way, and I think I could take Brazil as an example, they have an agreed exemption. So they can fill in the form, and I'm now going to share my screen and bring the form up onto screen. There we go. And they can fit in sections 1, 2, 3, 4A of the form, send in their fee, which I think currently is £265, and the SRA will check with your governing body and they'll grant you the exemption. You guys are lucky. Nice and simple. Other people can apply for an individual exemption. You're making your own application, okay? Now, some of those the SRA has already had a look at, and they've set out certain parameters for you being granted an exemption. Now, if you just pull up on screen here, so you can see that you can search here these different countries. If your country is not listed, don't panic. It just means they haven't had enough applications to put together what the situation would be if you applied. Okay, so if I just pick Kenya, for example, just out of as random, you can see they've set out what the requirements are for you to be granted an application for exemption from the SQE2 exam. Now, you can apply for the exemption before you sit the SQE1 exam or after, but you cannot apply for an exemption from the SQE2 exam if you have sat it and failed. Your failure is proof of the fact you need to sit it and pass it. So just be aware of that. Now, if you are in a situation like this, where they've said that they need proof of admission, certificate of admission probably is the easiest. Here, certificate of good standing. If you're going to produce that, it needs to be dated within 3 months of when you submit the application form. So the admission certificate probably is better to go for, because clearly that's going to be older. You're not giving yourself a deadline to get things done. Now, often you're required to produce a letter of reference showing a period of time of legal work experience post-qualification as whatever. Okay, so legal work experience is different from qualifying work experience. Completely different. There's no equivalence. Legal work experience means that you've been doing legal work, and then they say post-qualification, that's clear enough, as a Kenyan advocate. Okay? So does that mean that you were working as a Kenyan advocate or post-qualification as a Kenyan advocate? They're not clear on that. So I think there's a little bit of ambiguity which could be used. So you could say, okay, I was working post-qualification, but you certainly need to be working to the level of, in this example, a Kenyan advocate. If you're working as a paralegal, the SRA has made it quite clear that will not be good enough. Okay. Now, the work does not have to be done in Kenya. In this example, it could be somewhere else. That's absolutely fine. You can work, your legal work experience post-qualification can be in a different jurisdiction. That's absolutely fine. The reference letter there's several requirements of the SRA with regard to that. So if they're not met, then the letter will not be adequate. I guess that you would end up drafting it for your supervisor. The period of time you were in more than one location to acquire the required period, let's say 2 years, then you would need, let's say, 2 letters to cover each 12-month period, if that's how you put it together. Okay, now, as well as that, you would need to provide proof of the referee's professional qualifications, so admission, a certificate, or a certificate of good standing. And then you fill the form in and submit your fee. So let me just take you back to the form. So section 1 is your personal details. Section 2, we have in here the details of where you're qualified, and you need to confirm that the practice rights that you get from qualifying is yes to all of these areas in here. Okay? I'll come back to that. 3 is ethics, so presumably yes to all of those. 4, agreed exemption. If you have that magical agreed exemption I talked about before, tick that, nothing else. If, however, you don't, then it's 4B, okay? And you're putting in the organization's name and you're applying for an SQE2 exemption. Then the form has loads of stuff which is not relevant to you. This is all relevant to you applying for an exemption from SQE1, which I said don't bother with. You go to section 7, and what you fill in here, 7A, 7B, or 7C, depends upon your particular circumstances. If your 2 years qualifying work experience were completed as a mandatory part of your qualification, then you would tick that. So some people in South Africa, they do 2 years articles before they qualify, in which case you tick that, that's it. They'll check with your regulatory body and your qualifications proof itself. The SRA wants you to have 2 years legal work experience, but if all of that was post-qualification, then it's 7B, okay? And then you would put in the name. This doesn't really expand very much, so you have to squish into here the name and contact details of the referee or referees into there. If, however, it's a combination, so if you're, let's say, Pakistani qualified, the SRA regards 6 months as being a mandatory part of your qualification, and then 18 months is post-qualification that they require. So you would be completing section 7C, okay? Now, if your qualification does not grant you all of the practice rights listed in here, 2.2. For example, many people in Eastern Europe, ex-Soviet Union areas, they can qualify by passing a law degree, and they're qualified to do stuff other than litigation. And the same exists in some other countries. They have to take further exams like to become an advocate in order to get yes to all of these practice areas. Then the SRA will say you got to fill in section 8 of the form. Okay? Section 7 plus section 8. And you have to provide evidence, and we can see it in here, as to how the work that you've done means that you acquired the skills that are necessary for them to grant you an exemption. The SRA's default position is always sit the exam. So bear that in mind. Okay, so section 8, it's harder if you're in that situation. You've got to do a lot more work pulling this together, and the letter from the referee has to cross-reference the evidence in here as well. So a lot more work. If unfortunately your qualification doesn't enable you to say yes to all of the practice rights being granted in section 2.2. Now, exemption from the SQE2 exam, we assist with that. You can see what we do here. There's the page on our website about it. There's a link through to guidance, a link through to the form I've just been showing you, and also to guidance notes on what the SRA wants in those letters of reference that you might be drafting for your supervisors to accompany the application for exemption from the SQE2 exam. Okay. So I've gone into a little bit of detail on that, I'm afraid, but I hope that's of help there. So that's exemptions from the SQE2. Exemptions from QWE. Is that possible? Only if you're a qualified lawyer. And I've recently got a clarification from the SRA on this, because I thought it was nice and clear. And here it is in the latest blog. But the SRA, when it's become clear that it wasn't quite as clear as I thought it was. So, and this might be just a misunderstanding of the language being used. And I'm going to say this in the way that I understand it rather than the legalese from the SRA. If you're a qualified lawyer in any jurisdiction and you sit and take and pass the SQE1, you're taking those exams there, you are automatically exempted from the QWE requirement. If, however, you're a qualified lawyer and you have sat and passed the LPC, so you were following the LPC route, but you then want to switch route onto the SQE, and so you say, hey, SRA, can I trade in my LPC pass so I get an exemption from the SQE1? And the SRA said, fine, yeah, you get your SQE1 exemption. Then you will not be exempted from the QWE requirement. You will have to have a minimum of 2 years full-time equivalent qualifying work experience confirmed to the SRA by an SRA-regulated solicitor. And as I've already said, the SRA are not going to grant you exemption from both the SQE1 and the SQE2, so you'll have to sit and pass the SQE2. So you have that choice there in that situation. Do I get exemption from the SQE1? If so, fine, but I'm going to have to get my QWE confirmed and sit the SQE2. Or do I sit the SQE1 exam, be exempted from the QWE, which you probably have already anyway, and then apply for an exemption from the SQE2? So there are choices to be made there. One little point on apprenticeships, which is just for those people living in England and Wales, I think, really those are disappearing. It was possible to apply for apprenticeships as a graduate. You can still do so as a school leaver, that sort of thing. But as a graduate, it was possible under the SQE to apply for a graduate apprentice or a place which could help with funding, the funding for the exams and for the training. That really is being withdrawn by the UK government because they feel the money should be applied elsewhere. So I'm afraid that boat has really sailed, but just in case you were wondering about that. Okay, so the SQE and the 4 elements in there. Okay, we looked at whether you need a degree or degree equivalent, what the exams are and how you can apply for exemptions, the qualifying work experience element and where exemptions may apply. This bit here, proving your identity and such like, I'm afraid, is very much standard stuff that you have to do. We do help where people don't have a solicitor to confirm their qualifying, their identity. If I just go up here, ID verification, your service to help with that. But most of you will have a solicitor who can do that ID. Right, I've done a lot of talking. I hope that's been clear. What I'm going to do now is to stop the sharing and have a look at any questions that we have in here. So I'm moving over to the Q&A. If you have questions, please type them into the chat and I'll work my way through them now. Okay, so first question, Hi, everyone. I'm a foreign qualified lawyer with over 10 years of experience in corporate law and litigation in a civil law jurisdiction. I recently passed the SQE1 and I'm currently preparing for the SQE2. Oh, well done. I can't see a question in that, so I'll say hello. Okay. Hi. I only don't mind me asking. Have you come across any reliable information about whether the SRA grants an exemption from the SQE2 exam to lawyers qualified in Saudi Arabia? I've heard from a friend that the SRA does not permit such an exemption. The guidance suggests lawyers in Saudi Arabia are considered less comparable in training or scope to those practicing in England and Wales, which may affect their eligibility. Okay, so let me paraphrase that question. So, can Saudi Arabian lawyers apply for exemption from the SQE2 exam? For this, I'm going to share my screen and take you to part of the SRA website where you can have a look to see what they say. Let's have a look for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, okay, so the SRA has considered that. So what do they say? You can apply for an individual SQE2 exemption. To do this, you will need to provide evidence of your professional qualifications, so an admission certificate. At least 2 years legal work experience. Okay, fair enough. Evidence that your legal work experience can be either of these or a combination of them. Evidence from the Saudi Bar Association or the Saudi Ministry of Justice to show that you have completed the mandatory period of 2 years pre-qualification experience, or that you have completed a reduced mandatory period approved by the Saudi Bar Association or the Saudi Ministry of Justice. If you have been exempted from the mandatory period of 2 years qualification experience, or the period has been reduced, a reference to show that you have legal work experience post-qualification as a lawyer in Saudi Arabia. And the reference should show that you have completed the 2 years in total legal work experience. For example, if you are exempted entirely from the mandatory pre-qualification work experience, a reference should cover the 2 years, or if your mandatory pre-qualification work experience was reduced to 1 year, and a reference should cover 1 year. Okay? And it should be accompanied by proof of your referee's qualification. So, you know that I talked earlier on about and showed you and talked you through the situation with Kenya. This is a variation on that, but it's a similar theme. So you can, as a Saudi lawyer, apply for an exemption from the SQE2 exam. There are these technical requirements which you need to meet, which we can assist with, or there is guidance on our website. If you go into here, there, and here, you'll see that we've got guidance on what on that as well. If we're helping, then we do make a charge for it, obviously. So in summary, a Saudi Arabian lawyer can apply for an exemption from the SQE2. They just need to meet the requirements. Let me now look at the next question. Is it possible to confirm QWE from the civil jurisdiction as an in-house non-qualified lawyer? So let me again paraphrase the question. Can QWE be legal work in a civil law jurisdiction? And the answer is yes. The SRA is not prescriptive as to where the QWE is being done. It does not have to be in English and Welsh law. It does not have to be done in England and Wales. So it's more about acquiring the skills. Okay? So it certainly can be done in a civil law jurisdiction. I confirmed the QWE of French lawyers, Spanish lawyers, Italian lawyers, just to give just 3 examples. They're all civil law jurisdictions. So absolutely, certainly. So long as it is the provision of legal services, that is, and you can show the work and you have a supervisor, then an external confirming solicitor should have the elements to be able to do that. Now, whether the work you've been doing does, in their eyes, equate to the provision of legal services will depend upon the particular circumstances in each situation. But civil law jurisdiction, not a bar at all to having QWE confirmed. Next question. I am a foreign lawyer and wondering if I have to apply for exemption from the SQE2 before I can apply to sit the SQE1. So let me paraphrase that. So can I apply for SQE2 exemption before I sit the SQE1 exam? And the answer is simply yes. You can apply for the exemption from the SQE2 before, during, or after you sit the SQE1 exam. But the key thing is you cannot apply for an exemption from SQE2 if you have sat the SQE2 exam and failed it. Also, in order to apply for an exemption from the SQE2 exam, you have to be qualified as a lawyer. If you're non-qualified, that option is not available to you. Next question. Hi, I'm a qualified lawyer in Nigeria with 5 years experience in litigation, commercial law, and business law. What can I do to be qualified to practice in the UK? Okay, so let me paraphrase that. Nigerian qualified lawyer, what to do to practice in the UK? Now, I'm going to step outside of the SQE first of all in answering now to say you can just ask the SRA to let you be accepted as a foreign qualified lawyer. I'm not an expert in the process for that, but you can do that and people can hire you as a foreign qualified lawyer. Now, I'm not going to start talking about visa requirements and such. That's a different story. I think I'm not an immigration lawyer. If we're talking about the SQE exam, then as a Nigerian qualified lawyer, you will have to sit and pass the SQE1 exam. And let me just go to here now to look, instead of Saudi Arabia, at Nigeria. I can't remember all of the particular requirements in here. So Nigeria, barrister or solicitor. Let me just check that I'm sharing my screen. Quite possibly I'm not. So let me just share my screen for this. Okay, this is the SRA website. So what do they say? You can apply for an individual exemption from the SQE2 exam. So if you're sitting the SQE1 and then going to take the SQE2, on the basis of what the SRA has clarified to me recently, you would be exempted from the QWE requirement. And in order to apply for the exemption from the SQE2, you would need to prove your qualification. So certificates of evidence of your qualification from the Supreme Court of Nigeria. So that's a little bit different. I guess that's because that's how it works in Nigeria. And then you need to provide a reference showing you have at least 2 years legal work experience post-qualification. Okay. And proof of your referee's qualification. So there's information about this in here. The letter of reference or letters of reference, which presumably your draft for your referees, will need to meet what the requirements from the SRA are concerned. So you got a guidance note on that, or we can help with that. That's your application for exemption from the SQE2 exam. The actual form as well, you will be filling in. Let me just run through this. Section 1, Section 2. I'm pretty certain the Nigerians, when they qualify, get all of those practice rights. Ethics, Section 3, and Section 4B, ticking SQE2 exemption. And then you will, on Section 7, be ticking Section 7B. All the qualification is post-qualification, okay, 2 years post-qualification. And you'll put into this bit here the details of your referee, so name and contact details, so the SRA could contact them should they wish to just check that. So that's Nigeria there. Right, okay. I am an advocate from Azerbaijan. Can I get the SQE2 exemption? Lovely. Okay, so let me rephrase that. So Azerbaijani qualified lawyer and SQE2 exemptions. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again and go back to here to look at the SRA's website to what it says about Azerbaijan. There we go. Right. Azerbaijan is one of these ex-Soviet states where we have this 2-tier qualification. Lawyer who just sits and passes their law degree is able to do a lot, but not everything. So a lawyer, here we go. That's the requirement, what you need to do. Advocate, you have to do a lot less. So in Azerbaijan, you take a further exam to become an advocate, which then gives you the full practice rights, equivalent to what a solicitor would have in England. I think that's to do with litigation and such like. So you can apply for an individual exemption. To do this, you need to provide evidence of your professional qualification. That's it. The SRA is piggybacking on the qualification in Azerbaijan. If you're admitted as an Azerbaijani advocate, then you're going to be able to apply very simply. You don't even need to fill the form in. You just need to submit the proof of your admission. Okay. If you are just a lawyer, sorry to use the word just there, but hey, to do this, you will need to provide evidence of your professional qualification, degree, etc. A reference letter showing that you have at least 24 months legal work experience post the qualification as a lawyer. So we talked about the reference letter that needs to meet the requirements of the SRA, which again, you can look up here in that guidance note. Okay. Proof of your referee's qualification, admission certificate, etc. And as your qualification does not confer practice rights in criminal or civil litigation or advocacy, so it's not equivalent to qualifying as a solicitor, you will need to complete Section 8 of the SQE2 exemption application form. So providing specific examples, blah, blah, blah. So if I then go back to the form here, so you're going to be completing sections 1, 2, 3, 4B, 7, which is post-qualification 2 years here, this bit here, and section 8, where you're going to have to provide evidence, description and evidence, as in redacted documents, redacting for confidentiality, of course, which show how you've met these requirements in here. And this dossier of evidence will need to be seen and seen by your referee or referees and cross-reference in the letter of reference. Okay. Now, we don't actually help people with Section 8, but I have someone I can refer you to who has successfully done this and can give you some guidance and assistance with it. So, yeah. So there's an example of people in Eastern Europe, ex-Soviet Union countries, where you have this 2-tier system for qualification as lawyers. I'll move on to the next question. Right. When is the graduate apprentice route stopping? Would my employer have time to enter into one in the next few months? If so, where can I find information to provide my employer as to what we would need to do? So this is, I'll paraphrase this, graduate apprentice route closing. And really, yes. So it may be that you've already missed the boat. I don't know. Where can you get some information? I'm going to share my screen again and just take you to our website here. And if we just search on here on our website, apprentice, I did put an article up about this quite some time ago, as you can see, 2020. The SRA very carefully constructed the SQE so it would fit within the UK government's apprenticeship scheme, which is really England and Wales, not Scotland. And so there's information there. You can see the URL or just go to our website and search apprenticeship, and lots of information in here, and the apprentice support service is really, really helpful. Your employer would apply to one of the companies which is accepted by the government on the apprenticeship training register. BPP and the LPC are the only ones I'm aware of. There might be others, but those are the ones I'm aware of. And they will administer all of this. So I would get in touch with those two companies and ask them as soon as possible, because they will have intakes for the SQE apprenticeship scheme. And it may well be that September 2025 is the last intake, because as I understand it, the scheme is closing at the end of this year. But if you've missed the intake point, then effectively it's shut earlier. So get in touch with them as soon as possible. Let me just look in here, SQE training. So SQE training providers. So the only ones that I'm aware of that do this is BPP and University of Law. Okay, so get in touch with them PDQ to double check this position on that. The benefit to you, of course, is then under the apprenticeship scheme, your cost of tuition and the exam costs will be covered by the British government. Okay, through this, in summary. So, yeah, quick action required. Next question. Could you please clarify, if I worked for the commercial organization as an in-house lawyer, not as an advocate or the lawyer of a legal firm, what is the process for QWE confirmation? Okay, let me paraphrase that. In-house lawyer, how to get QWE confirmed. So, first of all, the SRA accepts work as an in-house lawyer as being QWE. They're quite clear about that. Now, if you are not qualified, you would need to have your QWE confirmed. If you are qualified, but you've sat and passed the LPC and choose to have that traded in against an SQE1 exemption, then you also would need to have your QWE confirmed. Now, if you have an SRA regulated solicitor in the company, maybe in the legal department, they can do that for you. Ask them. It's very straightforward. You basically go onto your My SRA profile, put their details in, the name of the company, the dates that you want to have, the period you want to have confirmed, and the SRA will email them asking them to confirm. Because they've seen your work, it's very simple and straightforward for them. If, however, you don't have an SRA regulated solicitor in the organization, then you need to find an external solicitor wishing to do that. And we do that, so you can get in touch and I will then usually ask some preliminary questions to filter out those people for whom it would not be appropriate. But then I usually schedule a free, no obligation Zoom to go through your circumstances to check that it's ethical and appropriate, and also then to explain what the process is. So, yeah, so that would be how you could get your QWE confirmed. Right. And that's the last question. Oh, and we're just getting thank yous now. Okay. Well, I hope that has been helpful. I try to make it as clear as possible. I know it's quite technical, but I hope those people that attended, you've picked up the bits that are relevant to you and it's given you some clarity, even if it's bad news. And at least it's clear. Okay. Right. Well, I'll wish you all the best, and please do let other people know if you feel that this is of help. I'll just share again the YouTube channel. I didn't share that before. So if we go here, you'll see that we have a YouTube channel where we have many videos about the SQE and QWE, these pink ones in here. So feel free to access those. They may give you more specific questions. If someone's watching this video afterwards, they're here. Feel free to subscribe. We'd love to get these the number of subscribers up over 1,000. There's lots of information, as you've seen, on our website, and just get in touch and email me. You'll see the email on our website as well, Ingemar@hunningsconsultancy.co.uk. You'll also see that there's a form you can fill in here. So unless there's anything else, I'll wish you a good afternoon. All the best. Bye-bye. Oh,